Hey folks, this is Steven with another of the Just Another Fanboy live streams. I have to apologize for the lighting. It's never happened before, but for some reason the sunlight, which should be on the other side of the house right now, is causing a lot of darkness, and it's just weaving in and out. And it's starting to drive me a little crazy, but we're just gonna handle it because I don't got time to be moving stuff around. We are here to talk. And I have a guest here this week, as I do every week. I've always got a guest. That's no surprise to y'all. But this week I'm talking to fellow podcaster. I consider him like the podcasting godfather. One of them. There's a few. He's one of them. And we're talking to Peter Rios. Oh, very nice. Very nice. Did you just get that?
Always. No, I've had that. If you mentioned about my theater career, I directed Spamalot at one point. So
I saw that. I was like really excited when I saw that you directed Spamalot. I think that's
yeah.
really cool.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. Doing real good. I'll say this. Comics podcasting. I don't know if podcasting might be too general for you know what I mean?
No, yeah, I get it.
I don't want people to like suddenly go, "Oh, he's getting a big brain about all this stuff." No.
Yes. The comics podcast OG.
Yeah.
That's what I'd call you. It's like you and Derek Coward, both of you guys, because you're both. I mean, after you left Comic Geek Speak, and we'll probably talk a little bit about Comic Geek Speak, but after you left CGS, you started doing the Daily Rios, which is more than just a podcast. It's blogging, it's all kind of stuff. But the podcasting that you do now is a single voice podcast, and I find that I'm a single host podcast, and so guys like you and Derek who can do it and do it well, you provide me with a bit of inspiration. You're the meaning in my life. You're my inspiration. How are you holding up during the pandemic?
Good. 2021 kind of rejuvenated me a little bit, even with all the craziness going on. I decided you know what it was? I found a new project. When I find a new project and I'm excited about it, it kind of makes all the rest of the stuff come together, like because we've been in quarantine for so long in isolation, it felt like I was like a hamster in a wheel, just sort of spinning and doing the same things to try to stay sane, working remotely, doing the geek stuff as much as I could. But then I think with this new year, I finally said, okay, try to think a little differently and move on from there, and find the stuff that makes you happy. Yeah.
Are you talking about the Smallville thing that you're doing?
Yeah. Yeah. So I you mentioned the Daily Rios, which I started a year after leaving CGS. I took that time off, number one, because I was so busy. I was like busy with work, and I used to travel back from Philadelphia to Reading to record the CGS stuff. So that was getting to be a lot too. So I took that year off, and I sort of thought, okay, what can I do in podcasting that might be fun for me, creative for me, but also might get listeners, right? I don't want to do the same old thing as much as I can, even though I wound up, with formats that were kind of familiar. So what I did was I went back to the original, you talked about OG podcasting. Anybody that started podcasting from late 2004 to the end of 2005, a lot of the content was personal, was short, voyeuristic to many degrees. I mean, some of the top podcasters were people who were just husband and wife or a couple. So the whole daily thing, I was like, okay, I'm going to do a daily thing. It's going to be, some episodes are going to be short, some episodes are going to be long. So the daily thing has haunted me since then, because I did that first year 5 days a week, and then I was like, ugh, that was hard. But I decided to do the Daily Smallville this year because the 20th anniversary is in October. You're wearing a Superman hat right now. Yep. 20th anniversary in October. I did the math. I did my gazintas, and if I did one season a month, 10 seasons, that would take me to October, which is when it aired in 2001. The episodes are blog episodes, which is different for me. It's just note format. It's not even real. You're not going to read it. You're just sort of going to skim it. And then I'm doing one episode a week based on those 5 or 6 episodes. So that's my new daily part of the Daily Rios. Yeah.
Well, I read your first 5 because I was really into Smallville. It was a freaking good show, and there wasn't a lot of nerd stuff out there for us.
Right.
Has the episode gone up yet? Your weekly episode?
I did one, and I need to do the second week soon. Yeah, I think you're right, and I'm having conversations with like other people on text and elsewhere where, we give a lot of credit to Blade and X-Men and Spider-Man, but those are movies, but we sort of forget that Smallville was on TV when there wasn't a lot of TV content, not like today when something new drops every week. And it ran for 10 years. And I was talking to Daryl Taylor of the Taylor Network, and he said, that show really helped the WB survive. And I think when you talk about TV, superheroes on TV, you have to talk about Smallville. You just
Agreed.
Do. Yeah.
Agreed. I remember in that, for the first episode, the scene where the asteroids are hitting, the meteors are hitting, and if I remember correctly, Ma and Pa Kent, the truck has been turned over. They're hanging upside down, and then here comes little Kal-El looking in. And I remember watching that. My wife was with me, and she's not a nerd like I am, but I remember watching that, and I just went, it felt like the comic book. There was something about that just felt right, and I just said, this is going to be a good show, just from that one scene.
And you were reading The Man of Steel, the John Byrne stuff, or you are still reading it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm rereading it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's stuff that you can make connections back and forth, not only to that, to the first movie, to the old Superboy TV series. I mean, it really kind of, it blended all that stuff and also played with the whole Dawson's Creek formula.
Yeah.
And became this hit that went beyond just geekdom, right? And average American was watching it, or average TV person was watching it. And I feel like some of the stuff that I see in this first season, which is surprisingly good, even though it's just the Kryptonite Monster of the Week season, there's elements in this show that they're still doing in Flash, and they're still doing in Riverdale, and they're still doing in all of the superhero content that we see today. And it's been 20 years. It's been 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, do you know about the actress that plays Chloe Sullivan? You know what's happened to her?
And apparently Kristen Cruick as well.
Really?
Yeah, she was involved in that whole scandal too. And I saw a timeline of when that happened. So I'm curious to see how it affects their characters on the TV show, because I know Kristen Cruick leaves at one point, and I'm just real curious to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, I've been meaning to rewatch it, but I just haven't gotten around to it. There's just too much other stuff going on. But just reading those first 5 blog posts, I remembered, everything you talked about in the episodes, all the notes you took, I could totally remember. So it's not like I was reading your blog. I don't remember that happening, none of that, but it was fun. And it's interesting to hear about the mansion, how many times that mansion has been used in other shows and whatnot throughout the years. Cause I knew I have tried to watch Arrow. I've watched the first episode twice, and it's not for me. I don't know what it is about that show, but it's not for me. But I knew I recognized that freaking house. I'm like, that's Lex Luthor's house. That's right. Yeah, that's funny.
That's the X Mansion. That's the they've used it so much. Well, that's because all that stuff, they send all their film people up to Vancouver because of cheaper filming costs, tax credits probably. So Vancouver has become a centralized place. Battlestar Galactica filmed there. There's a lot of times, not only do the actors cross from like Battlestar, Smallville, Arrow, Flash, but then also the sets, and you start to see certain sets, and you're like, okay, that's the that's the facade of the building from Battlestar Galactica, where Boomer and what's his name first noticed that there were Cylons on Earth, and it's like, okay, you start to see the same thing. Unfortunately, what happens is sometimes that little cross, that crossing of actors, especially, it's like, oh, not this guy again, or not this girl again, and it's like, can we get some new blood, please? But what are you gonna do?
Yeah, Supernatural, it was also done in Vancouver, so you see a lot of those crossover too. As a matter of fact, I wasn't the guy who played Dean. He was in Smallville near the end for a while.
Yeah. They all bounce around. It's you know, as being an actor too, a theater actor, but I really sort of pay attention to that, and I see it a lot, and it just, I start to see the movie making or TV making rather than just sort of watching the show. It's kind of like when I go see theater, I'll sit back and I got to make sure I'm turning that director brain off sometimes if I really just want to try to enjoy the show. And I do it with TV all the time.
Yeah, no, I get that, because you start to learn little things, and then when you pick up on that when you're watching TV and whatnot, it can take you out.
The worst one for movies is the blue gold or blue orange aspect. You ever, you know, where they film, if you want a certain look in movies, you give your actors a lot of blue to wear, and the atmosphere is kind of like orangey, whether it's the sky or whatever. And then when the first time I read about that, I forget what they call it. I don't think it's the golden hour thing, but it's something related to that. I've noticed it everywhere now, and I'm like, oh, there they go, blue and orange, blue and orange, blue and orange. And it's like, it's kind of frustrating. So when you get a show that actually has color or introduces something different, you're like, you really notice it. And I think it happens a lot in sort of like your standard action movies, or movies that they're not trying to do anything but just make a movie, you know? So,
So I don't know if you remember this, but we met once in real life.
Okay.
You were still with CGS. It was the year that you guys had decided that you were going to try to hit as many conventions around the country as possible. And you and Pants had gone to the Kansas City, I think it was Planet Comic-Con. And I don't normally get out to conventions. I mean, they're really expensive. And but I took my son, and I said, well, when's the next time I'm going to have a chance to meet Peter Rios? Plus Scotty Young was there, and Cullen Bunn was there, and I hadn't met those guys yet. And so, we came up. And
wasn't that 2011?
Maybe.
Because I think it was sort of the last year of that I was in CGS. We hit C2E2 the week before, and then we stayed in Chicago for a few days, and then went down and hit Planet Comic-Con, because it was first of all, it was the very next week, and it was close. And we had a lot of fun there. We had a lot. We met a whole bunch of, like you said, listeners that we hadn't seen before. That was part of the thing, was go places where we hadn't been. We got invited to I think I hosted a few panels, and we had a Gail Simone interview that we did at our booth. That was great. I think we also, is that the one where we spent like some time at Freddie Williams' studio, the artist Freddie Williams. We got to see his studio. Yeah, that was great. That was fun. That was fun to go somewhere new and to hit a convention like that. And the people there were awesome. They were so awesome.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because me being I'm a very socially awkward person when it comes to meeting people for the first time in real life. You know, I can do this. I can talk to people on the phone. I'm better in text. But when I'm face to face with somebody, it's so I go to this convention, and I spend the money. We get in there, and ultimately, I think our meeting was just chalked up to me going, "Hey, what's up, Steven Orr? Yeah, just another fanboy." Yeah. And that was about it. Like the podcast, as you guys are really good.
That's funny.
And that was about the same thing when I met Scotty Young and Cullen Bunn. I'm just like, hey, like your stuff, because I didn't have anything for anybody to sign. I didn't have any other reason to talk to anybody.
Right.
So
I mean, and you're so full of life on your own show. You know, with the commercials and all that stuff. Like I wouldn't. I told you this is all an act back here.
Yeah.
Everybody's probably like, oh, that's a cool setup. And I just did it like 5 minutes before. I was like, what can I put on there to make this ugly shelf look not ugly shelf, but Just give me some background. Yeah.
Nice. I'm seeing OMAC. Is that OMAC back there? And
Yeah.
the Dark
I got
Mirror
some
book.
Donna,
Hush.
Donna Troy,
Oh, nice.
my girl.
Yeah.
Random toys that people, the Unbreakable DVD, Watchmen, of course, Man of
Yeah.
Steel back there. Yeah, I just grabbed a whole bunch of stuff. I said, let's just put it here.
So, what did you think of the Watchmen movie? Did you like it?
You know, where's the wrong side? I did. You know, well, here's the mistake. First of all, I went with a girlfriend that I was dating at the time. I can't remember if it was her suggestion or not, but a few of us went, mostly her friends, and I think they just didn't get it. They just were like, what is this? And I was watching it with the whole mindset of comparing it to the books. And I can't remember what her take was. So I don't think my experience watching it for the first time was good because of just everything that was happening around.
Yeah.
Kind of stunk. There are a lot of parts that I really do enjoy. And when you think of like a straight up adaptation of trying to adapt that comic, it was interesting seeing some panels come to life and some characters come to life, and some were better than others. I think the ending is a complete rewrite of what the book is. And I think it fundamentally changes a lot about the ending and then also about the rest of the movie. I'm not so much of a Watchmen, not diehard, but you know, I don't get bent out of shape if they make a movie, if they make a HBO series, if they do a sequel. It's fun to see these things, you know, go into other formats. So surprisingly, though, I do every now and then watch random videos on YouTube of it. Sometimes I just watch the whole thing in the background just to kind of hear it. You know, I'm not mad that it's out there. That's like some people are. You know? Yeah.
I've never finished it. I've started it twice. Okay. I got further the second time. The first time I watched it, I mean, I read the book and, but I didn't read the book until, I don't know, 2006, 2007. It was the first time I'd ever read it. So for me, it wasn't the same as somebody reading it for the first time back in, what was it, 85, 86 when it came out.
Yep.
And I made the mistake, I've since learned from this mistake, but I made the mistake on the podcast of referring to it as overrated, which, do you remember Umar from The Fixer's Hideout?
Yes.
He had a lot of things to say about that. And I've since learned that it's not overrated. Obviously, there's a reason why people love it. I read it at the wrong time. I read it after everything that it had influenced had come out, and I'd read all the stuff that it had influenced, and then I read it. So to me, it didn't have the same impact.
Right. I mean, you know, even going up to something like Authority or, I don't even know, just anything that kind of, I hate to use the word, but deconstructs superheroes or tries to put a new spin on it in one way or another probably owes itself to Watchmen. It's somehow, consciously, subconsciously. And you're right. Like when I read it, I was reading it at the time it came out. And let's see, 85, I was 12 or 13, 14 when it came out. So I'm reading this book that, first of all, I don't even know if the store was supposed to sell me the book, but they did. And it was a book, and I'm sure older people probably, they were like hit with the importance of it, but there was some great buildup with the ads. There were all these characters, and it was kind of like just reading this comic and kind of blowing my mind. The biggest thing that happened back in the 80s, I always like to try to pinpoint this when talking about Watchmen. Yes, I'm sure there are people who were like, this is groundbreaking, and they're writing reviews and blah, 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 blah. At our comic store, Golden Eagle, actually, at the first store, everybody was talking about the mystery issue to issue, and coming up with these crazy theories of the best one is anytime somebody had a jacket that had like twists, like a belt, And if you saw the belt in the form of I can't do it with my fingers, in the form of like a scythe, like a hangman's or a death's scythe, that person was going to die like either by the end of the series or in the next issue. So everybody was like looking, oh, Miss Jupiter has it. Oh, the Night Owl has it. Of course it didn't turn out to be true. And then the other great speculation was that the mystery of who killed comedian, everybody thought the comedian killed the comedian. Yeah. Everybody thought the comedian that died was a clone and the real comedian had come in, because they were talking about like DNA and all this other kind of stuff. So for us, it was like the mystery, at least for my group of friends, which included older and younger people. And then, like when you have a book like that, and you have a book like Dark Knight, and you have Born Again and Miracle Man, all these things just one right after the other, you got a sense like, okay, stuff is happening. The comics are getting better, right? Yeah. But did I know it was going to be what it was going to be at the time? No. And I think you're right. Reading it after the fact, sure, some people probably would go, but I think that's if you read it casually.
Right. Once you put it into perspective,
yeah,
you start to understand and you can respect something like that a
bit
more. Yeah.
Yeah. You could go back and you can sort of go, oh, I see. At the time, there were books that led up to this and had certain weight and gravity, but it really did. By the 5th, 6th, 7th issue, it was like a bombshell every issue.
Yeah. It's like I had a friend at work once, a guy that I work with once, say that he thought the Beatles were overrated. And I said, no, you can't say that. You can say you don't like them. That's fine. You can not like the Beatles, but you can't say that they're overrated, because pretty much anything you listen to nowadays was influenced by the Beatles. You'd just the strangest musical artists you'd find would reference the Beatles as an inspiration. You could. So I think it was at that point that I went, oh, now I get what what Omar was saying.
Right. Yeah. I think it's you can't deny influence. But I think when people say overrated, they're taking away the influence, and you just, whether you, like you said, whether you like something or not, you just can't take it away. Yeah.
So, all right, well, I know you talk about CGS a lot, but I think I'm more interested in talking about CGS just in regard to the way podcasting was then and how it is now, because it is much different.
Sure.
It was a smaller pond back then. And now I think everybody and their mom has a podcast. I say all the time that one of the reasons probably I don't have a lot of listeners these days is because I'm in a niche podcast as it is, comic books. And then I've narrowed the scope down even further by being a single host, and not a lot of people dig the single host. I don't, whatever. But, what was it about? So there's the obvious. Podcasting back then was not as easy to get into, as far as what you needed to get started, how you got the podcast out there. Nowadays, hell, you got a phone. That's all you need anymore.
Exactly.
A phone and a way to access the internet, and you got a podcast.
Right.
What are some of the other big differences between now and then?
Social media is a huge difference. We didn't have social media back then to the degree that it is now. Again, we're talking early March 2005, the first year. I mean, we joined Twitter in 2008.
Yeah.
So, and before that was MySpace and something called Comic Space. And I think Facebook was around, but again, none of the social media was the level. So I think the difference is nowadays everybody has a voice, even if you don't have a podcast. If you have a Twitter account, you think you have a voice. Like if you have 200 people or you have 2 million people, Facebook is the same way, right? Everybody's dumping their opinion. So I think it's this notion of your opinion getting out there and who's responding or who's reacting to it. And at that time, the way our social media was everything we did on forums. We had our own forum. So I think that is that was a big equalizer because you could also get your content out there. So not only are you just fighting for people to find your podcast and download it, now everybody can blast their podcast on Twitter, Instagram, elsewhere. And there's also a whole bunch of different formats, between releasing on Spotify, YouTube. YouTube is a big competitor now. I'm really surprised at, and you're doing this now, right? Because this is a video content thing. So my younger niece and nephew, they can sit there and watch people play video games and watch people unwrapping things, and they love it. I tend to I can't watch something because when I watch it, that's the only thing I can do. I can't multitask,
Yeah.
But if I'm listening to a podcast, I can do other things. So YouTube was a big competitor too. So I think, just like you said about the sort of emptiness of how much geek stuff we had in the early 2000s, we also didn't have a lot of distractions in that regard as well when it came to social media. So that's probably one of the biggest ones.
And CGS was pretty big back in the day. I mean, I think it was you guys and iFanboy, maybe around comics. In my mind, those were the three big comic podcasts.
Yeah, I think they were the three loudest comic podcasts. You can definitely give it that. I mean, our numbers were sort of crazy. I used to, the way I would factor how we were the size of CGS compared to like iFanboy had a website prior to their podcast, like for a number of years. Mm-hmm. So they were the other ones that also got a lot of numbers. Around Comics was which spawned out of CGS in the early days, was I think the reason, bless you, whoever that was.
That's my daughter.
I was like, what's that? I think what was good about them was they were not trying to be like the other ensemble podcasts. Like a lot of time you get, you talk about this solo host versus ensemble. Most of the reasons why some ensemble podcasts don't last is because they try to be too big too early. And they try to go, we're going to have 10 segments an episode. It's going to be 3 hours long. But they never let you get to know who these hosts are. Most of the times they weren't friends to begin with, or they're just sort of like mutual friends from online. So even to this day, like Geek Syndicate is still around. Those are two friends from the UK. Yeah. Comic News Insider every now and then has the two original hosts. They were friends. So the ones that you understood who the hosts were in an ensemble format, I think that's the reason why longevity worked. And the way that we used to sort of go, okay, how do we know that we're getting traction, and how do we know that we're really reaching a lot of people? We used to every now and then get an email from like a creator and say, hey, you just mentioned my book. You didn't do an interview, you just mentioned it. And I got more orders from that mention than like an ad-in wizard or a pop-up ad on Newsarama on the website or something like that. And we were like, whoa, that's crazy. So doing the conventions also helped because, we got out there. We did a really big one in 2006 and 2008. Can you do that now? I think it's really hard to start an ensemble podcast now. I barely listen to any of them because something about them if they start to feel like they are spawned out of like the Zoo Crew madness of radio, I don't want to listen to it. When they're more interested in telling each other jokes about whatever, as opposed to like a discussion, I want discussion. That's what I want.
Yeah, that's the thing. There are just so many freaking podcasts out there, and I dabble here and there. I try to start new ones. I'll hear about one that sounds interesting, but yeah, if the hosts don't work well together, there's got to be a bit of chemistry. I mean, that's why it's one of the reasons why CGS worked, because you guys just hung out at the comic book store. I mean, ultimately what CGS was, the way it was to me was somebody brought a microphone into the comic book store and you guys were just talking about comics. I mean, you had your segments, you had the Stump the Rios and the junk like that, but you could tell that you guys liked each other and that you got along. It's one of the reasons why I liked Half Hour Wasted and still like Half Hour Wasted, because those guys are just the best of friends and they have that rapport. But yeah, sometimes, and if you know, I go out there like on the Reddit, they have podcasting subreddits, and you'll see a lot of posts out there with, "Hey, I'm starting a podcast. I want to talk about this. Does anybody want to join me?" And they just grab strangers from all across the country and they start podcasting. And sometimes it works, and but most of the time it doesn't.
Yeah, it's hard. It's, you know, this whole, I think the reason why you do the solo thing, and, you know, why Derek Coward has done the solo thing for so long and so many other people is, first of all, you set your own rules, you set your own pace, you set your own discussion, you know, and you know, listening to your show, you understand that even though you're doing a solo podcast, you are talking to people. You know what I mean? I just the way you deliver, I can tell you are talking to the listeners. And sometimes I think people forget that when you're doing solo podcasts, you know, they kind of just talk or they ramble or whatever. And it's like, ooh, you're still having a conversation, even though you're a solo podcast. So with Ensemble, the hardest thing is the other good thing, you know, we had eventually 8 random people that were on our show, right? At the height of it. Everybody had their different focus. You know, some were more Marvel, some were more DC, some were toys, whatever. So when you get to these ensemble podcasts today, the ones that I don't know what they like, either because they're spending too much time on what they don't like about something, or they all like everything. And I'm like, can you really, you know, that's the reason why I don't talk about Star Wars, because there's enough people out there talking about Star Wars. I don't need to talk about Star Wars. You know what? I like Star Trek. I don't like Star Wars. So no, it's not that I don't like Star Wars. I don't need to talk about Star Wars, right? So if I don't know what you like, then why do I want to listen to what you don't like? And how do I get to know who you are? So that's tough. And, you know, I can listen to your show and you're talking, you know, that's the reason why I pulled out the Spamalot thing, right? Or the Monty Python thing, because I know that you had done some episodes. I listened to it. I learned some things about it, about the Monty Python. You made me watch, because of your episodes, and it's on Netflix. I was like, let me go back to the beginning and watch all of the Monty Python shows, because I've never seen it, right? That to me is good podcasting. When you get me to do something or buy something, that's a good podcast.
You're gonna make me cry.
Oh,
well, I always joke that the reason I podcast is because it's like I read a book or I watch a movie and I want to talk about it, but my wife and kids don't really want me to talk to them about it, you know, because they're not into it. They don't care. It's either me talking to nobody, or I'll just, you know, might as well stick a mic in front of me.
Yeah. If I'm the only one that listens to my show, I'm totally fine with that. That's okay. Yeah.
And it is kind of a fine line to walk when you're thinking about, do you want to talk about stuff that you don't like? Or do you want to talk about stuff that you only like? You know, you can, because it can go wrong if all you're doing is talking about the books that, or to make it seem as if you just like everything. And I think there are times what I try to do. Well, I do it on my Patreon. I pick a book every month. I pick 3 or 4 books, like number ones. I put them out on my Patreon and I ask them, which one do you want me to buy and talk about? And then they'll vote, and then I'll buy it and I'll talk about it. And I may like it, I may not. But that, I don't do that for everybody, I guess.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I mean, I certainly have gone into a book that I haven't liked, or my expectations were not met. But it's the difference of, maybe that has to do with some of my theater background too. Like, can you still analyze something even though you don't like it without just going, I hated it, it sucks?
Yeah.
Because that's boring. God, that's boring. And but I think the other aspect, like you said, is it's why I cannot watch anything that Chris Hardwick produces. Not to trash Chris Hardwick, but I do not think he dislikes anything, because anything out of his mouth is, oh my God, that's the greatest. I'm in my feels, and I just start to go, "Mwah." Kevin Smith is getting that way to me now.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Kevin Smith's definitely that way.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, I'm done. Like, if you're going that route, I can't listen, because I don't know how discerning you are,
No, I agree. I remember when Kevin Smith came out to talk about Phantom Menace, before it hit the theaters. George Lucas had invited him up to Skywalker Ranch to watch it, and he was just all over the internet talking about this amazing new movie, and it's, I mean, I like it. I can enjoy the Phantom Menace, but it wasn't what he said it was, and he does that for a lot of stuff. And so whenever I hear Kevin Smith get out there and talk about how amazing this new movie is, I'm just like, man, I don't trust your judgment, buddy, because you love everything.
Right. And so, but you know what? Geekdom does this a lot. We like to trot out the same people all the time.
Yeah.
And Kevin Smith has been around for so long that I think we need to find a new quote unquote Kevin Smith, Yeah. And when I start to see the same people being trotted out as the representative of geek culture, I go, no, that is a very small representation of geek culture. There are other people that are out there that don't have the privilege and the luck that he's had, and also he's worked for it too. The guy sold his collection to, right? Isn't that what he did? He sold the collection, makes the first. I mean, he paid his dues, Yeah. But I don't always want him to be the only voice every time I watch something that's like, oh, and here's the geek part, Kevin Smith, and you're like, oh God, not again, So it's tricky. The fine line is tricky. I think people who do podcasting for a long time sort of start to earn their place, it's only really been in the past couple of years where somebody will say, what do you think about the influence of CGS? And I start to go, you know what? I'm going to own that, I'm going to own it from now on. Like, I'm not, I've actually been off of CGS longer than I've been on CGS. So I'm sort of done talking about it. But in the regards of like the inspiration, there are a lot of podcasts that started because of CGS. There's a lot of creators that came through that we helped to foster their early careers. And we made people spend money. I feel bad about that, but I also feel good about that. Like, there's people who spent money because of that show.
It's something to think about when you're doing a podcast, because there are times when I will talk about a book and I'll get to the point where I'm done talking about it and I start to say that I would highly recommend this book, but then I think about my own budgetary restrictions. And so I try to put it out there as, I wouldn't spend my own money on this, but then I'm low rent. I would wait until this was collected and buy it as a trade, or I would check it out from the library. If I stood out in front of people and said I would spend my money on this, then that means it's one of my top books of the year,
Right.
So it is something to think about. But you're right about CGS, because one of my go-to artists these days, probably my top 5, top 10, is Mike Norton. And I wouldn't know about that guy. Well, I probably would by now, but sure. I don't know if Mike Norton would be. Well, no, I don't want to say he wouldn't be Mike Norton without CGS, because the man's talented.
Sure.
But that's where I heard about Mike Norton and I got to know Mike Norton because of the CGS podcast. And I think there's a little bit of that there too. It's the guy's a good artist, but I got to know him thanks to that podcast, thanks to CGS, and then of course the Crankcast.
Right. He was smart, because Mike said, he emailed us and he said, guys, I listened to you. I really like you. And we're like, oh my God, it's, a creator. And we brought him on and talked to him, but then he started his own podcast.
Yeah.
And he is himself, right? He's not trying to be anybody. So, he built his, audience. A recent example of that is Tom King, who went and, he was just Tom King comic fan like everybody else, right? And then he got to know people and he became friends with people. And then he was like, I'm writing a book. And he's like, I'm going to go on every podcast and talk about it, because he understood the power of the medium, right? Which I think sometimes these days, when you talk about the difference between back then and now, that could be another difference. Some people nowadays forget that or maybe the power of podcasting, the recommendations isn't as strong because there's also Instagram and Twitter and YouTube and all that. But there is power in hearing someone talk about something passionately, having other people talk about that thing passionately after they've absorbed it. And you understand that it's no BS, right? Like they actually really do mean what they say.
Yeah.
So Tom King was like that. And then next thing you know, he's writing, Grayson and other things. And by going on all these podcasts, he's building up his fandom, and that is smart. That's really smart. And I'm not saying it's calculating. I'm just saying they kind of hit on a thing and went with it. And suddenly people would go to conventions and see Mike Norton and say, hey, I heard you on CGS. Can I buy a commission? Can I buy your book? Can I buy Gravity back then? Right. And then the whole Battle Pug thing he did came out of discussions and appearances on iFanboy, and then that became a book.
Yeah.
It became a shirt first, and then it was like a book and all kinds of crazy things. But people loved it because he has pugs in his life. So yeah, it's really interesting to see the influence and the cycle and just the growth of it all.
Well, and I think the other great thing that CGS did back in the day was you guys were really good about fostering a community, supporting other podcasters. I don't know if I would see that outside of that comic podcast bubble, which is people genuinely wanting to help others create something that would, in essence, compete against what they themselves are creating.
Sure.
But nobody was doing it. It wasn't nowadays. You see everybody's trying to do a podcast because they're thinking they're going to make some money out of it. It's you see the videos all over the place, how to make money out of podcasting and blah, blah, blah. But nobody was doing it to make money back then. So it's not like, what were you competing against? Listeners? Most people were listening to pretty much everything anyway.
Right.
But it's, you guys had that forum and you even expanded on the forum and allowed other podcasts to have their own sub forums in your message board. And then it became the comic forums. And it was a neat time back then. And I tell you, there's times that I really miss it because I will go out on Twitter and I'll be wanting to talk about whatever. And it's not the same. It's not the same at all.
Right.
And, I will run into folks and start talking to them on Twitter and then realize, holy crap, that's so-and-so from the old CGS days. And because they're not using the same name,
right.
That they did not using that same fake name they did back then. But
that was Brian's idea. He said, let's create a one-stop shop kind of place. And so that you can, first of all, we can share listeners that way. Mm-hmm. If they're not listening to your show, but they like what you do on your forum, maybe they will listen to your show, You're right. The community really did fall apart. And it was kind of like 2011, 2012, 2013, when I started to notice that once discussion moved away from forums and onto the social media and suddenly you're getting input from people you don't even know, that's when it all really changed and spawned negative communities and spawn negative discussion and it's I'll tell you what, it's the reason why I don't like even though they generate a lot of views, the things on YouTube like what's wrong with this movie and I don't even know half because I don't watch them because I'm like, that's the part that I don't like. I know they say it's all in fun, but it's like, well, I understand the exercise and it's not like I haven't ever done that kind of thing before. But really, you're platforming, you're creating your content to pull in that kind of negative thing. So the minute someone hates a movie, they want to see that video because they want to celebrate the hatred of it. And it's like, I don't get that. I don't get
No.
that. And that's when people say to me, "Oh, you just like to be positive all the time." That's not true. I think there are ways to talk about something in a quote unquote positive way before you get into maybe the problems you might have or whatever.
Agreed.
That's the critic in me. And when I say critic, that's 4 years of theater education that I spent a lot of money on to learn how to analyze scripts, to analyze shows, to direct shows, to think about reviews, like that's being the objective observer, not the subjective fan,
Right.
so.
Well, and there's a huge difference between this is why this book didn't work for me versus this is why this book sucks.
Yeah.
There's a huge difference between those two parallels because
Yeah.
When it comes to especially comics, sometimes if I'm reading a book and I feel like I want to talk about it and maybe I didn't like it, something that you got to think about is really when it comes down to it, that comic ultimately was created by one, two, three, maybe four people, a writer, a penciler, an inker, a colorist, a letterer, an editor, and it's, for me, it's a lot harder to criticize something when it feels more like you're criticizing the person that created it and not the work itself.
Mhm.
And I think that a lot of these, the hater videos and the hater podcasts, I feel like they're criticizing the person and not the work is what I feel most of the time. And I'm not into that.
Yeah. And that, to go back to newer podcasts, if I get that feeling, if I get that sensation early on, I can't listen. I can't listen anymore.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So, well, let's talk about your other life. You are an actor. So you do the musical theater. So you act. Do you do the singing? And I know you dance.
Yeah.
You do choreography. You direct. It just amazes me. Which came first for you, comics or musical theater?
Comics came first. My uncle, my older uncle, was a comics fan. He was the one who gave me a box of comics from the flea market that he had. And a lot of them had the covers half torn off. They were late Bronze Age, like late 70s, early 80s stuff. There's an issue of Uncanny X-Men, the first appearance of Dazzler in there, but the cover's torn off, I no longer have any of those books. I read them so much. So he was a comics fan. And then my sister took me to my first comic store, which wasn't Golden Eagle. There was another store called Hildebrands at the time. So comics came first. I used to read Richie Rich. I used to read, I wasn't an Archie reader. I was a Richie Rich reader. My mom, apparently, she told me when she was a kid, she used to read Little Lulu. So I was like, oh, look, kind of in the genes,
Yeah.
So I was a comics person. Superman, the movie hits in 77, 78, whenever that was, 78, I guess. The Super Friends was on TV, Wonder Woman, okay, so I'm comics. But I was put into dance early on, and I liked movies like that, like Grease and Saturday Night Fever and Fame and Footloose. But really, musicals didn't hit until the 9th grade. I used to play in the pit band. I used to play synthesizer, piano in the pit band while my friends were up on stage. And then in my 9th grade year, they said, you should really do theater. First of all, you should do the show. First of all, there's a lot of girls in it. Secondly, it's a lot of fun. So I was like, okay, I'll do it. And then when I did it, the director at the time yelled at me and she said, why haven't you been doing theater all this time? So that's when the bug hit in 9th grade. So that was 1987, I think. So I was well into comics by that time. Yeah. But then neither of those things stopped.
Yeah. So you kind of had a knack for it.
Yeah. Whether it's because I'm Puerto Rican or, got natural rhythm, dancing. Everybody in my family has some kind of art background, whether it's, we were all put into dance, but then some of us also were put into music or art. One of them owns their own flower shop for the last 30, 35 years. One of them restores cars, so we still keep in the art world some way or another. My other sister used to own a dance studio. So the two things in my life that three things you could say: comics, theater, candy is the third one. But we're not talking about that. But definitely theater and comics. Yeah.
So at what point did you say, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life? Because it is what you do. You're not like going to a day job, working at a call center, and then on the weekends you're doing community theater. I mean, this is what you do.
This is what I do. Yeah. So when I went to school, or when I decided to go to school, I actually took 2 years off after high school. So I didn't go to college right away, because I didn't know what I wanted. I thought I was going to be an artist, which would have been dangerous because I graduated in 1990, and the way computers had changed graphic art and all that throughout the 90s, had I gone to school for graphic art or commercial art or whatever, the minute I graduated, I would have been outdated, you know? So I thought I was going to be an artist, and I took 2 years off. I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I found an art program, and I finally went to a performing arts university, and that's kind of what then, from there it's just been and it's been up and down. There's a reason why they call it starving artists sometimes.
Yeah.
But I've been fortunate that I've been able to stay consistent and work enough to make a living out of it. Boy, it's going on. Excuse me, it's going 25 years. Bless you again.
That was my other daughter.
25 years doing theater, and it's a hard business. It's dead right now, because of the pandemic. But fortunately, I can teach and do other things.
Nice. I was going to say, how's it been this past year with the pandemic? Since obviously you guys aren't probably doing a lot of live performing.
No, and there's been stuff on Zoom, and there's been people trying to invent new ways of doing theater, and it's great. I think it's great. I think it's a younger person's game, like they're going to come up with how to navigate theater virtually. I look at it and I miss theater. I miss the sort of live aspect, and that's unfortunate. But we'll get back to it eventually. So really, right now, it's like everybody's in a ever-present present.
Mm-hmm.
We just got to keep working our craft. It's a good time to watch stuff. Like Hamilton being dropped on Disney was a good thing, and they should do more of that. As long as they're paying their actors. Yeah, I think it's difficult, and there's some movement. We're seeing some things starting to happen, coming back slowly. I'm glad that I have a teaching aspect to all of this, that I don't have to worry about doing theater, but I do miss it. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there an aspect of it you like more than the others? Do you like the singing more than the dancing, or the dancing more than the acting, or is it just the fact that you can do all three? Because it really is more of a, I mean, you've got theater that's just, you go to a play and they're acting, but musical theater is more of there's just more to it. There's
right.
You got to be a triple threat.
Yeah. And someday, some aspects you have to have 5 different threats. Yeah. You have to sing, act, dance. It's kind of good to maybe sometimes have some acrobatics and some tumbling in you. And then there was a craze where actors on stage were playing instruments during a musical. So now you got to also have to play an instrument. So it's, I don't know. I think it depends on the show. Like, I really liked performing, and then I used to choreograph. I've been choreographing since I was 16. Where I grew up, we had a really great community theater scene, so I was lucky that I was able to do these kind of things at a really young age. But I love performing. Then when I got into directing, I liked directing a lot. I think the thing that frustrates me the most about directing is sometimes you get some actors in there that they think they're done learning, and it's kind of like, then they're no fun. They're no fun to play with in your rehearsals, because there's just no fun. There's no collaboration there. I would love to get back to performing. I haven't done it in a long time, because I really would like other people to tell me what to do. And I think there's some really interesting new works, and there are some new people with new voices these days that I would love to be under, because then I would get to learn what they think about theater. So it's one of the reasons why I love college, is teaching at a college, is because I get to hear what each new generation is fawning over, what they're gravitating towards, what they're listening to. They've turned me on to a bunch of new shows that I wouldn't have listened to, and new directors and new performers. So it's like comics, if you're only stuck in a certain era, that's great if that's what you want, but unless you experience another era, format, whatever, you don't really have a voice then for it. You can say you don't like it, but it's not necessarily because you have experience with it. Yeah.
Have you ever written for musical theater?
No, I'm a terrible writer.
Really?
I'm a terrible writer.
Because my next question was, have you ever thought of merging your two loves and creating a musical about a guy who loves comics or something, not a superhero musical. We've seen those.
Yeah, Spider-Man didn't work. And there's the old It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman from way back.
Yeah.
There's actually, I think I posted it on Twitter. I found a musical that I hadn't heard about called Superhero. And it was about a kid who is into comics. And they don't use established comic characters, but they use the comic.
Yeah.
Well, so I listened to it, and it's very derivative of a lot of other things. So I didn't enjoy it as much. And then, of course, Fun Home. Fun Home was a graphic novel, and then that became a musical, surprisingly. And it won some big award. I want to say a Pulitzer, but I don't remember. And it actually is a very good musical. So it's really strange. And it was interesting to see how they translated the main character being a comic artist onto the screen, onto theater. And the person would draw, and then you would see it up in the rafter. It was kind of cool. So the two worlds do meet, surprisingly. But like I said, I'm a terrible writer, and I know people say, well, the only way you can get around that is by writing. But even when I do blog posts, I don't understand grammar and where does this comma go and what's a semicolon versus a colon. And that's not my thing. I have ideas. I wish I could write. Maybe I should write and just let an editor fix it up, but I'm a terrible writer. So what I think I could do better is I would really love to be like an artistic director, where you can watch what people have done and then sort of look at it and go, great, this makes sense. This doesn't make sense. I think you should move this here, or, pace this differently. Like, I'm really good at that. It goes back to the whole analysis thing. I think that's where my strengths lie more than being a writer. Like, even the commercials that you do and the fun, like, I can't do that. And I'm an actor, and I can't, I can't riff and improv, That's not where my strengths in acting lie.
Well, the nice thing about the podcast is that I'm not exactly, there is some riffing and some improvising, but sometimes it's me sitting there with the mic on for 10 or 20 seconds thinking of something funny to say, and then maybe saying 4 or 5 things. Sure. And then the magic of editing makes it sound like I'm just really clever and witty.
Editing is amazing. People think like, wow, you just hit record and go. And I'm like, you don't know how many burps I've just cut out, and pauses, and stumbling over words or forgetting the English language, just forgetting words, and just, it's terrible.
Well, I'll tell you something that I just discovered over the last 6 months I record using Audacity. All the time that I podcasted back in like 2006 to 2008, and I've been podcasting now for almost 2 years, just discovered it in Audacity, and it's a thing called truncate silence. Oh. And you just select the whole file, and it takes out, if you're sitting there for 5 minutes not saying anything, it just takes all that out and shortens it down to little. Oh my God, that has saved me so much time editing, just pulling all that out.
And that's good. I know some people use that too, but what winds up happening is they don't sound like they don't stop talking.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know if there's a way. I guess maybe there's ways to set.
I found that it's easier to add pauses than it is to take away the unnecessary pauses. For me, I pause so much that once I take it all out and then I'm going back and listening to it, I can go, okay, that didn't sound natural because I'm just blah, 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 blah. So I'll just throw a couple of quick pauses in there, and it's fine.
Yeah. Then I think that's, if anybody's listening that uses it and doesn't realize like, I don't know, like it sounds like you do the same thing I do. I record an episode, I listen to it while I edit it, and then I listen to it again after it's edited.
Yeah.
And just to make sure everything is right. So that's, at least 3 times that you're doing it. But sometimes I do hear that, and it's like they just talk, and then something gets clipped, and it just doesn't sound natural. So that's a scary thing. Yeah. I don't use that tool because it wouldn't work for me because I'd be too nervous. But I don't mind listening to, what else do I got to do? I'm just sitting around.
So, okay, I'm going to put you on the spot, musical theater spot. If there are 5 musicals, because I'm not a musical guy. Now, I will tell you that I have watched musicals, I have gone to musicals, and I always seem to enjoy them, but it's not something that I seek out. So if you were to say, here are the 5 musicals that are from now till the beginning that you need to see, what are those 5 musicals?
You need to see. You need to actually like sort of, whether it's live or otherwise, not just listen. Yeah. Okay. Oof. Yeah, that's a hard one. I will say, okay, so I'll start with Hamilton just because it's out there. But I think the thing about Hamilton is, I need to get my phone for this. The reason why Hamilton was so successful is because it used content that could bring in an audience that maybe isn't used to musical theater, because the music is not all musical theater. It's got mixes of R&B and rap and ballads from that sound like they're off the radio, and it's the vernacular that they used is comfortable to the ear, even if it is spoken fast and all that. Plus, watching it, it's almost like a whirlwind of events. It just doesn't stop. It just kind of keeps going. So that's one that I feel like definitely you should experience, whether you come out of it liking it or not. That's not the point, right? Like,
and I have Disney Plus, and yet I haven't watched it yet, and I don't know why. I have no excuse. I've been telling myself, because I know that my daughter she likes musicals, and there's really no reason why we haven't watched it. But.
Right. And don't try not to make a thing of it. Like, if you are going to watch it, don't go, okay, today's the day, let's get the popcorn, because then I think you're going to hype it up. Just sort of like oh, I got nothing. Oh, you know what? Let me watch it. It's on. Yeah. Okay. So I had to pull up a list of, like, because suddenly I couldn't remember any musical. I think everybody should watch Singing in the Rain. I think it is the finest movie musical, even if it's not your favorite or the best. It is so clever. It is fun to watch. Donald O'Connor is amazing in it. I know so is Gene Kelly, obviously, but Donald, and the history behind how they made that movie as a tribute to making movies is just clever and just fun. So it's like, you got to watch Singing in the Rain. Like, I feel like that's a no-brainer. To watch. See, that's the thing, because some of these you can't really watch because they're not out there. I guess West Side Story, it's sort of cliche. So
is what I always think about when I think of West Side Story.
It's another musical that has a lot of history to it. It's kind of perfect in many ways. Excuse me. And it has some drama. I mean, the movie won Oscars, and there's something visceral about watching West Side Story, I think, sometimes. So the first time I did West Side Story, we did it outside in a city park. We had a 3-story scaffolding set. We did it on a basketball court. By the time you got to the dance at the gym in the show, we basically went through sunset, like it was starting to be twilight. Every now and then a random ambulance would go by, and it just added so much ambiance to the show. So West Side Story is pretty phenomenal. I really like, even though it's different than the stage musical, I like the movie Hair, which was directed by Milos Forman.
I have seen Hair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It gives it a little bit more of a story in the movie, which I like. It's out there. Dancing by Twyla Tharp. The dancing is amazing. It's a crazy story. It's a crazy musical. It's a product of its time.
Yeah.
But it's pretty phenomenal. So you said you saw it. What'd you think of it?
It's been a while. All I can really remember from it is, man, I can't even think of the main dude that's in it.
Treat Williams.
Yeah, Treat Williams. I remember the line "waxin' flaxin" about the long, luxurious hair, or whatnot. And then isn't Age of Aquarius? Doesn't that come from that as well?
That's what it starts with. Yep.
Yeah, I honestly don't quite remember what it was about. But I feel like, I mean, I know the whole point of the hair, they were hippies. Vietnam, was that part of it?
Yeah. War. Yeah. I mean,
it's been a while.
It's been a lot. It's about a lot of things, and the stage musical doesn't help. It's kind of, all over the place, and you have to kind of make something out of it. But
yeah.
I'm looking at movie musicals that maybe aren't off the. Okay, here's one that's not. It wasn't a stage play first. It's its own movie musical. But did you see Rocket Man, the story about Elton John?
No, I have not.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Is it?
Yeah, and so at the same Rocket Man and Bohemian Rhapsody came out at the same time. Bohemian Rhapsody seemed to take everybody's attention, whereas I think Rocket Man I think it's much better. It uses the music in interesting ways, and it remembers that it's still a movie, so it does some trippy things here and there. So Rocket Man is that's like my tangent off the track kind of list. Oh, you can't look now that I'm seeing all these, you can't go wrong with Grease from the 70s.
Well, yeah, I've seen Grease many times.
Yeah, Grease. Look, Footloose was sort of a movie musical. Producers. The from the original Zero Mostel one to the Matthew Broderick, Nathan Lane one is pretty great. Rocky Horror Picture Show. Gotta watch that.
I feel like I've seen that. I feel like I've seen that one.
Yeah. And I could probably keep going and going as I look. Oh, The Wiz, the movie The Wiz is fantastic.
Oh, yeah. I've seen The Wiz. I was a kid, but I've seen The Wiz. He's on down the road.
Yeah. That was one. See, that was one that the reason why I think, to kind of put it in directing terms, the stage musical of The Wiz is nothing more than taking the Judy Garland version and adapting it for an all-black cast, right? But they don't separate. They kept the main character in Kansas, and nothing really changes other than you're using a different demographic of actors. Whereas The Wiz was smart about, okay, let's sort of update it a little bit. Let's put her in New York. I love that the Munchkins are graffiti. Everything. They kind of made it make sense with the culture that they were trying to represent. And I even have thoughts on like how to take that even further to separate it from the Baum version or the movie version, the Judy Garland version. So plus it's funny. The Wiz can be very funny if it's done right. Yeah, and you get to see Michael Jackson and Nipsey Russell and just Lena Horne and Richard Pryor. I mean, it was. I have a friend of mine that we can quote that movie left and right, and whenever it's on, wherever it's at, we'll just watch it because it's fantastic. Yeah, so that's a pretty good list.
Here's something weird I heard about Grease recently. I was watching one of these YouTube videos. It was like top 10 movie endings that had people scratching their heads, and Grease was part of it. And I was originally watching this going, why are people confused about the ending to Grease? And they show, where they're in the car, the song's playing, they're singing the song, and they fly off into the sunset. And evidently people were confused by that ending. I just thought it was it's a musical. It's just a fun ending. But apparently there's some theories out there that the summer that Sandy died, because John Travolta's character, didn't he save her? He was saving her from drowning or something, and that's how they met.
Yeah.
And that actually what the movie is trying to say is that she really died over the summer, and everything in the musical is this fantasy that she's the, it's heaven, and that's her finally ascending to heaven
Yeah.
with Danny Zuko. I don't know if you've ever heard that theory, but I thought that was pretty weird.
I've heard that. I've also heard that when they did the car, the race, that Danny died. That's when
Yeah.
Danny dies, and that's why after the race, Sandy becomes his version of what he thinks.
Yeah, I think they mentioned that as well.
Yeah.
That only proves to me that I don't really put a lot of thought into stuff when I'm watching movies or reading books or whatnot. When I listen to some of those episodes that you and I think Murdo did about the Watchmen, and there were all these different, there's so many. That book is like a frickin' onion. There's just so many layers, and I didn't catch any of that stuff. I obviously don't read that deeply into things, but
Well, I mean, I think books like that succeed because you can read so many different ways, right?
Yeah.
I know some people get frustrated when the only way they try to read it, when they try to read it just to read it, it doesn't work, right? I know Morrison gets that rap a lot, and some Alan Moore stuff. These sort of high concept writers who fail, sometimes they fail, and that's okay. I think I like to see failure as much as I like to see successes. I'm always confused by people who say that was the perfect comic, because it's like, well, if it's a perfect comic, why do you need to read any more?
Then you're done.
You're done. So, so I think you're right. Like, read it the way you want to read it, and then if you want to go back and enjoy it in other ways, well, here's how. There are times, especially on CGS, where we would get into arguments about what a scene was trying to say or whatever, and there are many times where I would be like, okay, now you're just being willfully ignorant and not trying to see what it is. When an author is trying to make certain points, then you kind of gotta give over to it, or just say that you don't see it. But that's not the fault of the author. Maybe, I'm not always beholden to the idea that if you don't understand something, it's the author's fault. That's not true. It's really based on experience and what you gravitate towards too. And if you can't see those things or don't see those things, that's fine. But it's not a failure of the product. It's like, what was I reading just recently? I was reading something, and they created an image that was clearly an homage to another cover, and it was meant to be, and if someone didn't see that, okay, fine, I saw it. But if the person that didn't see it said, well, why should I know what that is? It's like, well, again, it's not that they're trying to evoke something for the people who do understand it. So if you didn't know, then you just don't know. You don't know what that cover means, So I don't know. It's
no, and I think I dig that kind of stuff. If I can see, if I do get something else out of it, if I read it again, first of all, it makes me feel smart if I catch what it is they're trying to do behind the scenes there. But I don't know. I typically don't catch that stuff, and a lot of times when it's pointed out, I find it pretty amazing that people can write that way and have all this hidden meaning, that people can literally read the book over and over and over and catch something new every single time, because then it makes the book even more priceless, because you don't just read it once and you're done. You can enjoy it over and over and over. I do remember. Do you remember the old bullpen bulletins with Vince and Dave?
Sure.
I remember listening to one of their episodes, and they were talking about the first issue of Astonishing X-Men. And there's a scene in that book where Kitty Pryde, her first appearance in the issue, and she goes into the X Mansion, and she does it by phasing through the front door. And Vince, I love Vince and Dave. I'll just say that first. But Vince starts talking about how the meaning behind that scene, and how her phasing through the door was the author's way of expressing how the mansion is part of her, and for a moment she and the mansion became one. And I'm like, no, I think he was just trying to show new readers what her powers were right off the bat, you know? But for Vince, that's what he got out of it. And I think it's great that somebody can read something like that and find this deep meaning that, you know, it just makes it more of an experience for them. I don't want to say I'm not smart enough to catch a lot of that stuff, but I don't know. I don't think I take enough time. I think I just read stuff and I just take it in, and if I catch it, I catch it. If I don't, I don't.
I mean, what Vince, that kind of thing, I always try to preface it with like, look, this is me just seeing this.
Yeah.
Like, I freely admit this is me seeing it. Because that, you're right. Like, that's something a little bit more subjective, I think. But like, take for instance, okay, let's go to Star Wars. When the trailer dropped for the last recent movie, the trilogy, I don't know, Rise of Skywalker, right?
Yeah.
And it was Rey just standing in the desert and listening, and then all of a sudden the ship comes and then she flips over, whatever. Somebody pointed out an older movie that had kind of the same thing of some guy standing in a desert and then a car or plane comes towards him, and it's sort of it's a popular movie and it's a popular shot, like it was a movie shot, right? And they were like, well, they were probably homaging, you know, doing an homage to whatever that was. I never would have gotten that because I'm not a big movie buff, right? It meant something to them. Maybe it meant something to the creators, or it was just an accident or coincidence, because how else do you film something like that? You know, like, is it any different when Jack Nicholson is standing in his Joker outfit and he sees the black bat plane and he says, come on, come at me, right? Like, there's only so many ways you can film that sort of thing, because, you know, think of like Christopher Nolan's Joker when Batman's on the bat pod and he does the same thing. He's like, come on, hit me. It's the same sequence. It's the same, like all three of those things. How else do you film it? You know, I don't know. So sometimes it gets a little too much into the subjective. So that's when I go, okay, this is my head canon, or this is me thinking this. This is not, I'm not trying to say the author is saying this, you know. Yeah. I only say the author is saying it when I know for a fact that it's clearly like an homage or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's like I don't know if you watched. Do you have Disney Plus?
No.
Okay, it's when I watched the two new they dropped the 2 new episodes of WandaVision. You know, whenever I watch something like that, there's a couple of YouTube channels that I'll go to a few hours later, and they'll be like, "Here are all the Easter eggs you missed out of this episode," and some of them I feel like are actual put in there by purpose. You know, the filmmaker obviously put that in there. Some of them I think they're stretching, but I never catch most of them. But it's really interesting to see that.
Hey, it's very rare that I can just sit down and just enjoy something to enjoy it.
Yeah,
and it's like I miss that, and it's to the point where I started to do that regularly. I started to say, you know what, I want to read this or I want to watch this, not because I want to do a podcast on it. I just want to enjoy it, and I've been making myself do that, so that the rest of the stuff doesn't feel like homework. Because if that's all you do all the time, it's hard to turn. After 15 years, it's hard to turn my podcaster brain off.
Yeah.
So I try to make sure, what am I doing with this? I'm just watching.
Yep.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, the 1989 Batman, I just watched that last night. I probably haven't seen it in 15, 20 years. Oh, wow. And loved it.
Still holds up.
For me, it still held up. Heck yeah. That I probably saw that movie 20 times in the theater. That movie was and I'm not shy about saying I don't really care for Batman these days, because I think there have been a lot of writers that have handled him in a way that just annoys the crap out of me, when he's like, I'm going to fight Darkseid and I'm going to take him out because I'm Batman and I know all the ins and outs and I can plan for everything. That gets on my nerves after a while. But really enjoyed that. Really enjoyed watching that again. It was real fun.
It's fun to go back. I mean, it's so easy to go back these days too, and just go. There's sometimes when I can't sleep and I'm on like a rabbit hole on YouTube, and I'll go, okay, what am I watching? I don't know. Let me just and then out of nowhere I go, let me see the opening of the G.I. Joe cartoon movie, that awesome Statue of Liberty fight where you get to see all the vehicles. Like, that's it. I don't want to watch the rest of the movie. I just want to watch that. And then I'm like, what else could I watch? Oh, how about let's watch where Optimus Prime dies and when Megatron dies and gets turned into Galvatron. Let me just watch. I just want to watch that little bit. And it's the same thing with the movies, right? Like you can watch so many clips on YouTube these days, just like, or like I have the DCU app. So, if I'm cooking and I just put on a random Justice League Unlimited cartoon, that I love doing that kind of stuff. And just, it kind of makes you remember how pure your geekdom was at one point or another.
Oh yeah, I saw the Transformers animated movie in the theater.
So did I.
Was quite shocked at the use of the S word.
Yeah.
And then Optimus Prime dying.
Yeah. The music, the craziness, the guy who can talk really fast from the commercial.
Yeah, the Micro Machines guy. Do you mind if I ask how old you are?
I am Jesus, I don't remember. 48.
Me too. 72?
Yep, 72. Yep.
All right. Well, I got one more question, and then we can wrap this sucker up because my back tends to not like sitting here for too long. What comics are you into right now?
So I'm reading right now. One of my pleasure comics is Planetary, because I've never finished it.
I don't think I've ever read Planetary.
Yeah, it's good. It's one of those, we're talking about Easter eggs and homages. I mean, that's one that Warren Ellis is really kind of show, like he's playing around with archetypes and pulp heroes, Shazam, the Justice League, the Fantastic Four. I never finished it because the last few issues were dreadfully late, so I never finished it. And then speaking of the same artist, John Cassaday, I'm rereading, because again, I don't think I finished it. You brought it up earlier, Astonishing X-Men. And I'm also I went back and started to read for the very first time Giant Size X-Men #1, all the way up to when I started reading X-Men, which was the 180, I think it was. I've read the Dark Phoenix saga, and I've read Days of Future Past, and I read like one or two other John Byrne issues, but I haven't read the Cockrum stuff. So I started that, and I've never read any of the Paul Smith era X-Men. So I
recently read those. They're really good.
So that's a God. If you really want to be called like a comic book pundit or whatever, like you got to read that. So I'm like, okay, let me do that so I can stop embarrassing myself. And then I'm reading the Marvel saga from the 80s. I was doing a bunch of stuff on Twitter about that, like things that I'm learning about the Marvel universe. I just recently read Justice League Endless Winter.
Is that any good?
You could really read like the first chapter and the last chapter, and it's kind of all you need. It's a
that was one of my options the month that came out for my patrons to pick, and they didn't pick it, and I was slightly upset about it. But
I would say, like, if you have the DCU app, if someone has the DCU app, they read it on there, then great, because then you're reading it for free or whatever.
Yeah.
But let me also say this too about the book. There are a lot of people who are tired of crossovers.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like this is a crossover that you don't need 20 years of history, It's just a fun, light crossover with some really good artwork, some interesting ideas. But by the end of it, I was kind of like, okay, I don't know how much more I would give to that, But some people might like it just for the story, so that's fine.
Have you read Tom Taylor's Suicide Squad?
No, I have not.
Really good.
I haven't read a lot of Tom Taylor, and is Tom Taylor the writer behind Injustice and all that?
Yes. Yeah. And I had a friend who kept trying to get me to read Injustice, and I wouldn't do it because what's the point? It's a video game and it's out of continuity, and why would I want to read a video game comic? That's stupid. And then I finally read it, and it's It's really good. He's quickly become one of my top 5 writers.
Yeah. I feel like when I get to writers like that, I want to go to the thing that made them kind of, established them.
Yeah.
So that is one. That's something I want to try to do. I thought about it and then I didn't. But I'm also trying to read stuff from like older books in my collection. What did I just pull out? I pulled out the original Lobo miniseries. There was something else, and I can't remember what it was. I can't. It's escaping me. But there's. I read. It was for another podcast, but I read this Lois Lane and the Jimmy Olsen maxi series, and they're pretty good. They're really great.
The recent ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Jimmy Olsen one is a lot of fun and has some really great cartooning in it. It's so good.
I've heard good things about the Jimmy Olsen book.
They're worth it. They're definitely worth it. Yeah.
Well, I don't get a lot of new books these days. Any books I read nowadays, I read digitally. Because I've reached that age where I don't have room for anything else.
I hear you.
So just being able to carry my collection around on that is pretty nice.
Yeah.
But through Marvel Unlimited, I started reading. I tell you, do you have anything like that, like a Marvel Unlimited or the DC?
I have the DC app. Yeah.
The first thing that happened with Marvel Unlimited is it's like suddenly you have so much to read. Where do you start?
It's exactly right.
And I ended up finally I just picked a year and I started in 1983. And I'm about finished. I'm not reading everything. I'm picking and choosing. There are certain, but I don't want to read everything.
Right.
But I'm reading stuff like Daredevil and the Amazing Spider-Man and X-Men and Captain America. They've got the Mike Zeck Captain America right now. That's some good stuff. Fantastic Four, John Byrne.
Yep.
The new Defenders, which have great covers, and the interior art is never as good as those covers.
Right.
They got a lot of Sienkiewicz and just great covers.
I collected a lot of those.
Yeah.
Are you doing Simonson Thor?
Yes.
Yeah. Also awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. They have been recolored though. I don't know if you've and it's not horrible, but I'm not a fan of that. Yeah. It's not the classic, you know.
If they recolor it so it still has the element, not the pixel, but the whatever it's called, and it still looks like newsprint, but it's slightly recolored, I'm fine. Yeah. But when it's like it's straight wash of color, it doesn't work because that's not.
Yeah,
I always feel like that's not what the artist drew.
Right.
They didn't draw
right.
it for that.
Yep. And it's not over the top. You know how when digital coloring really became a thing, and people were really going over the top with skin tone and
flare,
just all that crap. It's not that bad.
Okay.
But it's not just the 4-color thing that it used to be, where it looks more like it's just a flatted book than a full color book. But it's still enjoyable. I really enjoy the idea that Thor stops being Donald Blake and he's what was his name? Sigurd Jarlson or something like that, and he's this just freaking giant guy with the ponytail and glasses.
If you haven't already, make sure you throw in Marvel, the miniseries in the 80s from Marvel, all of them, all like Jack of Hearts and Hercules and Kitty Pryde and Wolverine, Magic.
I just started Magic. Falcon, yeah. I just started Magic. I read the first one. I found it a little slow and a little weird, but I'm going to keep going because I love John Buscema.
Yeah.
Kitty Pryde and Wolverine was one of my first series as a kid.
Cool.
I was really into Wolverine because I saw him on Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. And my brother, he was the one that really collected the comics. He kind of passed that down to me. He said, "Hey, here's this new book coming out. It's Kitty Pryde and Wolverine." And that was like one of the first things I ever collected.
I think all those miniseries, even though they're not all great, were so interesting because they allowed Marvel to play with their other characters, maybe some new writers, some new artists, but they also made they kind of stayed in continuity. Like the Beauty and the Beast one with Beast and Dazzler. which is not very good, but it had some ramifications. And there's a whole bunch: Nightcrawler, Iceman, Gargoyle, Namor. God, I loved those miniseries. They were so good. Oh, the Hawkeye one's good. Hawkeye's good.
Yeah, just finished that one today.
Yeah.
Just read issue 4 when it was a really weird ending because it's like they take out the bad guys and then he can't hear and she's trying to ask him out, and so he doesn't want to be embarrassed, so he just ignores her and walks away. And then boom, you turn the page and they've been married and they're on their honeymoon. It's a really weird way to end that series.
Yeah, that was good. West Coast Avengers is also another one that's pretty good. Yeah, good stuff.
Yep. Yeah, I think I picked a pretty good, because I think I started reading Marvel. It would have been in '85. Is that when Secret Wars started? 84? I think Secret Wars is when I really started to read Marvel comics. But like I said, my brother was the collector. He would go to the actual comic book store, but he talked my parents into allowing each of us, I have 2 brothers, so there were 3 of us, allowing each of us to pick 2 Marvel comics to get a subscription to, because he knew he'd be able to read them. And I had picked Captain America and G.I. Joe. And so my Captain America is I got most of that Grunwald run with Captain America.
Leading up to 300, I was getting those. Yeah, the fight with Red Skull. As a kid, I used to read everything. So it was only later that I kind of picked DC over Marvel. But and it's so interesting that I was there for Byrne Fantastic Four and Simonson on Thor. And I missed Frank Miller's first Daredevil, but I saw that Born Again cover and the first issue, and I picked it up. It was so interesting to read comics at that time that now everybody looks back on and goes, well, that was like the height of the 80s, and I was like, I was just buying books. So yeah, good stuff. That's all good stuff.
Yep. Well, I'd read the Miller run and completely forgot that he had stopped, and then came back with Born Again, and it was Mazzucchelli on it.
Yeah.
So all I could remember was that Miller had a great run on Daredevil. So I'm reading these old books and I'm like, this is all right. This isn't the earth-turning stuff that I remember it being. And then suddenly he goes away and I'm kind of shaking my head, and then bam, I come to Born Again. I'm like, oh, this is what I remember.
Yeah, right.
But what's weird is really my deepest memories for Daredevil is the Ann Nesenti, John Romita Jr. stuff with Daredevil, which had like freaking the devil in it and stuff like that, which is pretty weird.
I've never read those. I know I know a lot of people talk about that run, but I haven't gotten to that.
I haven't read them since I was a kid, but I think that's why I've started back in '83. I'm trying to get in, move my way up to all the stuff that I used to read as a kid. I remember really being into Alpha Flight as a kid, but I recently started reading those again, and they're all right. They're not as good as I remember them being, but they're still kind of fun.
Such an interesting book, though, because it was almost like anti-superhero. It was more about their personal lives.
Yep.
For the first, especially the first 12 issues. And Byrne's artwork is, was for as crazy as he is, it was pretty damn good on that book. It's you don't get that these days too much, where an artist can just kind of breathe on a book and do what they want, unless it's like an independent but when it comes to the mainstream stuff, it's just stuff like that doesn't happen anymore.
No, I read his first Fantastic Four book, and I talked about it on an old podcast I did. And it was, it's like nowadays you get a new creative team that jumps on a book, and that first issue is setting up what's going to happen for at least the next 6 or the next 5 issues. And John Byrne's first issue was just this done in one. Diablo was in it. It was really no big deal. But that's people talk about great runs, and John Byrne's Fantastic Four is a great run, but it's not, I'm not one of these, they just don't do comics the way they used to, but they really don't.
Right.
And, and that can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing, but
probably, I was going to say the only person who, and I think do you read Savage Dragon?
No, I
No.
used to.
Okay. I think that's like the only
Yeah.
person that's doing comics the way we might remember how they
Yep.
did comics. You know,
Yeah.
he's just doing his comics. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was of course you were there too when Image started up, and I read all those books as they were coming out, and I probably still have bricks of number one issues somewhere up in my room. I remember distinctly being at a comic book convention. I think it was in Chicago, and people, retailers that were there, they had literally you could buy a brick of Spawn number one, and that's the moment I realized, yeah, these books aren't going to be worth anything. If you're buying them by the brick, they're not going to be worth a damn. But people were, oh my gosh, here's 20 issues of Spawn number one. This is I'm gonna get my kid through college with this.
I still see him in 25-cent bins and 10-cent bins and first issues. I think I did pick up. I saw Youngblood 1 was in one of those 25-cent, and I had since sold mine years ago. Not for anything, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna pick it. I'm gonna buy it just because I want that book again. You know, because it was such a moment in time.
Man, he's one of those guys, Rob Liefeld. You know, I remember his New Mutants and his X-Force, and just being in love with his stuff. And he's one of those creators that whenever he puts something new out, I want to get it. I just have to get it because I want to feel like I did the first time I read his stuff. And you don't, because it isn't great. And I think he kind of knows that, but he doesn't care because he has a huge following regardless. He's just going to go and do his stuff, and he's going to sell books and people love him. But it's there's that preteen, however old I was. Well, no, because that would have been
that's 91,
89, 90. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would have been out of high school.
Oh yeah. His New Mutant stuff.
Yeah. But
yeah.
It's never gonna. You just can't go back again. You just can't go home again. You know.
If you have Amazon Prime, they have a really good documentary about the Image birth, with interviews with all those creators, and it's so good because you get to see them when they're younger, when they're older, and I learned a few things on there. It's not all new information, but if you don't know anything about it, it's great. It's a good documentary.
I'll look it up. I watched like a 5-piece thing on YouTube through Sci-Fi Wire that was they talked to all of them at the time that they were making it, which was a couple of years ago, but it was really good. And it was really fun because Robert Kirkman was part of it.
Right.
Since he's now a founder, you know, an official founder, and it was really kind of fun watching him talk about how he would go into the comic book store and he discovered for the first time that you could get a pull list. And they could pull stuff and put it in a box, and all he got were the Image books, and then he ends up being a founder. I find him kind of a fascinating guy.
Yeah, you have to be to be someone who's that creative and has had a history over that many years. You know, you don't just get through that without having some kind of bravado. You know?
Yeah. Well, and that's when I learned that when he was doing Walking Dead, he had sold it to Image. Somebody had said to him at one point, well, we need something. It can't just be a zombie book. Nobody wants just a zombie book. And he said, oh, well, issue number 4, we're going to find out that it's aliens. And they were like, okay, we can do that. And then after a while, I think Jim Valentino was like, when are the aliens going to come in? And by that point it was too late because it was already selling record numbers.
Right.
And he's
I
like,
think that's the same documentary that I saw.
There's no aliens. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good. It's good stuff.
So fun.
All right. Well, it was good talking to you. I'd love to have you back sometime.
Definitely. Maybe along with one of your Marvel reads if you're reading something.
Yeah. Maybe we could pick something.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
That'd be cool. All right. Cool. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop the broadcast so the people won't see us, but we'll still be on for a few minutes.
Awesome.
To wrap it up. But for those of you who may be watching live, peace.